Daniel watched his first two victims with a warm smile on his face. He had fulfilled his lifelong dream. After Claudia and Chip drew their last breaths, almost hugging each other on their bed, Daniel started looking for objects inside the room. He was not done with them. He grabbed his large hunting knife and began cutting his victims open. He removed their insides, their fat, and then he looked at them some more. They were getting closer to his fantasy. Before his final act, Daniel decided to destroy their faces too. They were too beautiful to be left like this, with peaceful expressions on their faces. And when that was over, he took out a phone and hid it inside Claudia's belly. Inside Chip, he put a drinking glass. A few days later, a detective would ask him why he did this. He smiled and said, "To f with the minds of the people investigating this." Daniel Marsh was proud of himself. He had become his role models, Ted Bundy and Richard Ramirez. News of his shocking crime traveled fast in the Davis, California community, then across the country. And the most shocking fact of all, Daniel was 15 years old. Who was Daniel Marsh? How did he pick his victims? And did anyone notice his decline into madness? Let's dive in. 87-year-old Oliver Chip Northop and 76-year-old Claudia Maupin lived a happy life in Davis, California. They were old enough to have great-grandchildren, but they still loved each other very much. And in many ways, they had rediscovered their inner kids after they got married. You see, these two had met when Claudia was already in her 50s and Chip in his 60s. They had a lifetime of experience, and now they wanted the simple joy of life. It was a really happy marriage. No work, no stress, no kids drama, just quality time to enjoy together. Claudia was so energetic, everyone thought she was 20 years younger. She was still involved in her community, and she put her heart and soul into everything she did. One of those things was bringing her and Chip's families together. Both of them had been married before, and they had adult children from those relationships. Now, they could all be one happy family. And they were, until one day in April 2013. In the late hours of April 13th, 2013, Claudia and Chip were asleep in their upstairs bedroom. They did not hear someone cutting their window screen and entering their kitchen. They did not hear when Daniel Marsh climbed into the first floor wearing a ski mask, gloves, and taped shoes. He did not make a sound. Daniel also did not make a sound as he watched the couple sleeping for 10 minutes. Climbing on top of their bed frame, he just sat there like Spider-Man, all dressed in black, waiting for someone to notice him. Eventually, Claudia did. She woke up for a second, only to see his terrifying sight a few inches away. She screamed for her life, but that was just the cue Daniel was waiting for. He took out a large knife and began sticking it into Claudia over and over again. By now, Chip was also screaming, crying, and begging Daniel to spare their lives. They'd done nothing wrong. But the more they screamed, the more Daniel enjoyed it. He'd been hoping to become a serial killer for quite some time. He jagged Claudia 67 times. Chip was hit 65 times. Even a couple of hits would have been lethal. But Daniel was after so much more than simply taking their lives. He wanted this to be his first. He cut them open, removed their insides, and placed two clues inside of them, a phone and a glass. The detectives would think a lot about that, Daniel said to himself proudly. He took one last look and then left the scene before the sun was up. The following morning, Chip and Claudia had events to attend. Chip was part of a folk band, and they were supposed to rehearse that day. Claudia, on the other hand, was an active member of the local Unitarian church. When they didn't turn up to either event on April 14th, their friends got worried. First, they phoned each other. Did anyone know anything about either of them? Over a dozen people spoke to each other wondering about Chip and Claudia's whereabouts. When they realized no one had heard from them, they decided to grab a car and check their home. It wasn't long before the couple's friends discovered the disturbing sight, a kitchen window with a slashed screen. Fearing the worst, the friends phoned 911. There was no DNA evidence left behind, just the brutalized bodies of Chip and Claudia left in a scene emanating the worst horror movies out there. Their poor families would be left in such a state of shock that it would never really go away. Can you imagine living with the knowledge that your elderly parent, who would never hurt a fly, left this world in such a brutal way? The Davis police worked hard to gather any relevant clues from Chip and Claudia's home, but this was hard without fingerprints. Clearly, they thought this predator was not at his first victim. However, the forensic team did notice something else. Nothing had been stolen. This was pretty strange. In elderly homicide cases, it's usually burglars who hurt them. They'd acquired valuables, and sadly, they are easy prey. But nothing had even been touched in Chip and Claudia's house. The perpetrator had come with one goal only: to take their lives. The FBI was called to the scene that day too. They reached the same conclusion. This was an experienced killer. But none of the agents had any idea that the killer was a 15-year-old boy, and this was his first home invasion. Sadly, the police had absolutely nothing on the criminal, and Chip and Claudia's families could not think of anyone who would want them dead. So the Davis PD's suspect pool was pretty much everyone in Davis. To the family's shock, the case went cold. The authorities were just keeping an eye out for strange clues and urging people to come forward if they knew anything about this horrific incident. It would be Daniel Marsh who gave himself away. He just couldn't help but brag about his greatest accomplishment to his schoolmates. He was not like his idols, Ted Bundy or Richard Ramirez. He wanted praise and attention after his first kill. He could not commit to his ultimate goal: to become California's most feared predator. Plus, he had been promising his friends he would do this for 5 years. That's right, Daniel Marsh was 10 years old when he started talking about ending people's lives. 2 months after the attack, one of his friends decided it was time to call the authorities.
Can this be anonymous?
What are you reporting?
Double homicide that happened at April.
You're reporting that, or you have information regarding that?
I have information regarding that.
What are you calling to report, sir?
The double homicide that happened in April this year.
What can you tell me about that?
Everything, actually. Daniel Marsh.
Daniel Marsh?
Yeah, Daniel Marsh or Dan Marsh.
And y'all true crime fans will know that sometimes when a teen takes a life and brags about it, their friends don't take them seriously. Sometimes several people know about it and refuse to talk to the officers. Even they think their evil friend is just being dramatic, or they're afraid of getting in trouble with authorities or their own parents. But this guy found enough courage to make a call, even if it took 2 months.
He opened the stomach of both the people, and you put a phone in the woman and a cup in the guy. The reason why I want to remain anonymous is because if my mom finds out, she will send me to military school.
When the dispatcher sent the name Daniel Marsh down to the Davis PD, some officers said, "Hey, why is that name familiar?" They ran his name through their database, and lo and behold, Daniel was a small town hero. 3 years before, a 12-year-old Daniel made the local news in Davis. He had saved his dad's life and even earned himself a Red Cross Hero Award. His dad appeared alongside him in newspapers, calling Daniel a hero and praising his talent at math. He was even photographed while doing his homework. His dad suffered a heart attack while driving, when Daniel thumped his chest and revived him before calling an ambulance.
All of a sudden, he passed out and sort of flew back into his seat. I grabbed onto the steering wheel and directed it off to the side of the road, started pounding on his chest, and after about 30 seconds, he came back.
Of course, Daniel wanted his father to live, but at school, he spoke of people alive and gouging their eyes out for fun. Daniel Marsh was born on May 14, 1997 in Davis. He grew up with his older sister Sarah and his parents Bill and Sherry, but all was not well for Daniel. He was 2 years old when his mom suffered a concussion. It was so bad that she developed a serious case of amnesia. When she saw her 3 loved ones gathered around her hospital bed, she couldn't tell who they were. If anything, she was worried that these 3 strangers were staring at her. This affected the family in a big way. Sherry had gone from a caring, devoted mom to another child who needed round-the-clock care. Eventually, she went off to live with her parents, and Bill became a single dad for 4 years, after which Sherry came back. After years of treatment, she remembered enough to try and be a mom again. But Daniel did not take to this well. Young children can develop debilitating abandonment issues after losing a parent. And for Daniel, he had lost his mom when he was 2. For him, it was as if she had abandoned him. No matter how Sherry and Bill tried to explain the situation to Daniel, he was never close to her again. And Sherry did not help either. She kept telling her kids she'd never had amnesia. You guys, I don't get why she would lie to them. How else would she explain her 4-year absence? Bill did not agree with her lies either, and Daniel and Sarah would witness several fights between the two. Then, when Daniel was 10, Sherry started an affair with a woman, and it wasn't long before he found out that it was his teacher. After Bill found out, he asked for a divorce and moved out of the house. And when Daniel's teacher moved in, Daniel was furious. He just could not reconcile the two worlds. This made no sense to him. And his feeling that his mother was the enemy was only confirmed by this. Most of the time, Daniel spent his free time in his room, isolated from his family. When he was called to have dinner with them, he would insult his new stepmom and make horrific, bigoted remarks against the two. It shocked his teacher he was even capable of these words at such a young age. This is what triggered Daniel's murderous thoughts.
When I was 10, I thought about and plotted about killing the woman that my mother left my father. What was your plan?
It wasn't long before Sherry sent Daniel to a shrink. Some kids take a long time to open up to a therapist, but Daniel was very forthcoming. He told them how he wanted to slit his mother's girlfriend's throat. And when the therapist referred to this as a fantasy, Daniel said no. This was a plan. And after his dad's heart attack, Daniel's thoughts got even darker. The thought of losing his dad only triggered his abandonment anxieties. Now, all he could think about was death. He did not do well in school anymore, and all he cared about was creeping out his schoolmates with his dark fantasies. According to some kids, he would approach them and say, "Hey, I'm Dan and I like the dark." By the time he was 14, everything that could be wrong with Daniel's mind was wrong. He was obsessed with starting fires, he would terrorize animals, and he would wet his bed. This is what's known as the McDonald Triad, the 3 signs that predict a child's likelihood to become a serial killer. Scary, but true. Around this time, Daniel also started skipping school heavily, shoplifting, and indulging in every illegal substance he could get his hands on. He'd become a raging alcoholic, smashing his mother's furniture, punching through doors and walls, and shouting at everyone around him. Whenever he was angry at his mom, Daniel would go stay at his dad's. But one day, Bill kicked him out and told him never to return. As you can imagine, his drunken behavior didn't stop at Sherry's place. But Daniel's problem wasn't that he had a serious addiction or that he was violent. To him, his worst problem was that he couldn't feel anything. Daniel would tell detectives that he felt numb all the time and extremely low emotionally. Desperate to make this stop, he began to harm himself, and for a while he even stopped eating. Sherry was just as desperate. She checked him into a psychiatric clinic for 25 days, and when he was out, he had a prescription for antidepressants. In April 2013, Daniel was combining antidepressants with alcohol and a long list of destructive narcotics. It's safe to say his mind was not in a good place. He could only think of taking people's lives, and his scenarios were getting more and more detailed.
Oh, how would you kill me? There's a lot of ways. Me to death with your tie. Okay. Your face into the mirror until it broke and using the glass to your artery. Your eyes out and just smashing your face into the wall. Nothing personal.
Nothing personal, he says. Daniel also told his therapist that he would happily take their life. He even wrote about unaliving people on Facebook, but at this point, you guessed it, no one took him seriously. Daniel had a few friends and was even dating a girl at his school. When they got together, they would watch dark web videos. So not only were his friends not taking him seriously, but they found his fantasies normal, perhaps even fascinating. The problem is, Daniel really wanted to become like the people in his dark web videos. In early 2013, Daniel took the life of a cat. Honestly, it takes a special kind of monster to prey on such an innocent being. When the school found out, they had Daniel committed to a psychiatric facility. Perhaps this was the only good thing the school did, trying to prevent Daniel from doing any more harm. However, psychiatric facilities release their patients when doctors declare they are well enough. And just 2 weeks later, Daniel was released, even after he had told several fellow patients that he was going to take human lives next. Daniel unalived Chip and Claudia 11 days after his mom won a custody battle against Bill. The thought of living with his mom and her girlfriend until he turned 18 was the last straw for him. Daniel's friend, who made the fateful 911 call that June, would give an official interview at the station.
Well, he talked about killing people a lot. I didn't really take it seriously until, killed someone. He cut both of them open. It's just to see the insides or something. And then he went to the woman, I think, and he wanted to know how an eye looked like. So he tried taking it out with a knife, but he said it was really hard, so he couldn't do it.
The detective had one last $1 million question for the boy.
Why did it take you until now to speak to us? Because, I don't know, actually. I was afraid.
What if Daniel would have taken more lives in those 2 months? Thankfully, he did contact authorities. In many other cases, no one ever does. On June 17, 2013, Daniel Marsh was arrested. Initially, he strongly denied having anything to do with taking Chip and Claudia's lives.
What do you know, Dan? I just know that somebody broke into this old couple's house and stabbed them, killed them. Of that one kid that, there's always that one outcast.
But the detectives broke the news early on. They had enough evidence to convict him. Several of his friends had testified against him by now. Listen to his reaction.
What is my life? Why should I?
Yeah, his life is ruined. What about Chip, Claudia, and their poor families? What about your own family? Then he started begging the detectives to send him to a mental hospital instead of a prison.
If you want to help me, then don't ruin my life. Anything, send me to the psychiatric hospital. Every time I look at someone, in my mind, I see flashes of images of me killing them.
Daniel didn't know that the detectives don't have the power to decide where their suspect goes. Plus, he didn't seem to realize how heinous his crime was. When he was asked how he felt taking 2 innocent lives, he said it was the happiest moment ever.
Not gonna lie, it felt amazing, most exhilarating, enjoyable feeling I've ever felt. It was pure happiness and adrenaline and dopamine, just all of it rushing over me.
Daniel was denied bail and tried as an adult. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. At this point, he'd spoken to an attorney. He knew that this was his only chance at a psychiatric hospital sentence. Plus, he'd manipulated his way out of it twice. He could do it again. Unfortunately for him, the jury knew this, and his defense team could not convince them that he had only done this because he was on a bad mix of medications and narcotics. This is never an excuse for butchering 2 innocent people. During his trial, another tragic clue was revealed. Daniel had not chosen Chip and Claudia for any specific reason. He was out to kill that night, and he entered the first home with an open window. Chip and Claudia lived 2 doors down from the Marsh home. Daniel Marsh was found guilty and sentenced to 52 years to life. He shed a few tears for his freedom that day. Shockingly enough, he has since appeared on a TED Talk about finding the humanity within. It's unclear whether Daniel has found some sort of remorse or guilt over what he has done. Perhaps he's still the same manipulative monster trying to earn himself an appeal by scoring good points with the public. Or perhaps he's trying his hardest to be a decent human being. Some say there was a decent human being inside of him all along. His many talks of unaliving people, even to parents or therapists, can be seen as cries for help. Why didn't anyone act sooner? Or is the system flawed enough that only after a crime this brutal can a monster be put away? Hey, thanks for watching. What are your thoughts on this tragic case? Do you know similar stories of teen killers? Let me know in the comment section. And before you leave, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that bell button. On to next time.